Hi there, this is Sarah Landis, one of the co-creators of HyperDocs, and I'm here today to talk with you not only about lesson design using HyperDocs, but also how to integrate social emotional learning practices into the art of lesson planning. So I'm super excited to share with you some good ideas and some great lessons. But first, I want you to think back, to remember. Okay, so by doing so, I invite you to close your eyes and just visualize with me. Consider a time when an educator helped you to feel safe, maybe encouraged you to do your best learning at school. Think back, remember what was it that he or she did specifically to support you? Try and recall the feeling that you had when that teacher helped you out. Maybe you remember something that they did or said that made you feel better. Also, just see if you can remember what qualities that educator had. What was it about a certain teacher that you call to mind that had an impact on you? I invite you to do this today because I want you to remember the role of a teacher, the role that you have on a student's life. And I invite you also to consider a student that you've been wanting to support. Bring that child to mind. Write his or her name, their name on a Post-it, and just bring them into the space today as you learn about social emotional learning and best practices for teaching with HyperDocs. I think it's important to remember why we do what we do. So what is SEL? What does social and emotional learning mean? Let's watch this quick video.
Social emotional learning is essential.
It's the tools that kids need to be resilient, to be problem solvers, to be good people.
SEL is really about the holistic development of young people.
SEL is trying to bring a balance to the individual and what are the personal competencies you need to develop to be successful. How do you pull them all together so that kids can relate and navigate the world more effectively?
The myth was that knowledge was information that could be bolted onto a brain like any other kind of mechanical part. The truth is, knowledge is constructive. The truth is, all learning is relational. The truth is that emotion drives attention and attention drives learning.
Social and emotional learning is about how you do school. It's about what the student experiences, what the student learns, how teachers teach.
We can think about schools and classrooms, out-of-school time spaces, families, etc., as places where there's an exchange of knowledge about the world, knowledge about yourself, and knowledge about the other persons that you're interacting with. All of those kinds of experiences, I think, help form and expose and shape the ways in which young people understand themselves and other people.
And we start talking about the whole child. Does your child understand self-awareness? Do they understand social awareness? Do they make good decisions? Are they responsible? And then we start talking about what that applies to academics and looking at all the essential skills we need them to be successful in life.
Children learn when their heart is open, engaged, connected, and filled with purpose.
Learning is magical, and through SEL, we can create conditions that allow all kids to access that magic.
So the video referenced these 5 core competencies. Together, these kind of make up what we mean when we say social emotional learning. They collectively kind of help the individual well-being, but also in an effort to not only learn, but also to get along well in society. So you can see that these 5 core competencies are part of classroom life, school life, and even life in our own homes and our communities. And so we choose kind of to talk about lesson design through these 5 core competencies today because they will help ground the decisions that we make as we create engaging lessons. Now, this particular wheel that I'm referring to was really presented to me by CASTLE, which is the Collaborative for Academic and social emotional learning. I love how the academics and the social piece kind of go side by side as you study these 5 core competencies. And oftentimes we hear teachers and students and parents and families and administrators struggle with maybe a behavior that we might see in the classroom or an issue, but really when you look at what is behind that, you'll see probably one of these core competencies, whether it's an issue related to a child's self-awareness. Maybe they just don't have high enough self-efficacy or confidence. Maybe they don't know what their own strengths are, so they're not able to use those in a classroom setting. Perhaps students are still working on self-management. A lot of times we see students who struggle with executive functioning. And how can we help teach and support that part of the child? Maybe it's more of the green section here, the social awareness or relationship skills, or even tapping into ultimately that responsible decision making where we feel connected to something larger. So I would invite you today to think about and reflect on maybe an area that you see yourself already teaching effectively. Where in these 5 competencies do you see yourself really kind of tapping into that part of your students already? What is an area that you could maybe improve on as an educator as you look at these 5 areas? And potentially you may even want to jot down the name of a student who is struggling, not just overall, but maybe start fine-tuning that kind of student analysis and place a child maybe in one of these 5 areas. That's going to really help you to not only know this child, but also become familiar with these competencies. This is not the only way to look at social emotional learning. This is just one framework that is helping us to kind of look at lesson design today. I think in a lot of ways, we are reminded of our why. Why focus our energy as teachers on social emotional learning? Because I think basically this idea of educating the mind without educating the heart is really not education at all. And like the video suggests, learning is a social construct. So we want to teach our students to feel good individually, but also to feel good as connected members to society. Another reason why we are investing our energy into this work today is because, good old Rita Pearson, she's passed on, but if you haven't seen her TED Talk, she reminds us very simply, every child needs a champion. And these are the parts that will create the scenario that is ideal for learning. So just that influence that a teacher can have, I want you in my classroom. You belong to me and to us. And I just think that we often forget as teachers that we have such influence and power to shape the children that we serve. So another reason why we would want to focus on social emotional learning, because you deserve it. We need it as teachers. We're burnt out, we're exhausted, so we need to bring the fun. We need to bring the organization, the self-awareness, the self-management. We often focus on others, and sometimes we have to remember to put on our own oxygen mask so that we can then turn and do that for our students. So another reason why I want to talk with you guys today and talk about lesson design through this lens of social emotional learning is because you deserve it. Take care of yourself so that you can also take care of your students. Okay, so let's talk about how. How might you go about integrating social emotional learning into your daily lesson planning? Today, I want to offer up a solution for you, and that solution is called HyperDocs. I will tell you more about HyperDocs in just a moment, but I feel that they're the perfect blend with addressing the 5 core competencies or any social emotional needs that you see in your classroom. Now, a HyperDoc, if you haven't yet heard of them, are very simply put digital lesson plans. A digital lesson plan that you give directly to your students, often built on Google Docs or Google Slides or using any other web tool or design options. The lesson plan is created by the teacher and put into the driver's seat for the child. The student becomes the driver in their learning when teaching with HyperDocs. Let me show you a quick example of what one of these might look like. Here's a proportional reasoning HyperDoc. You'll notice there's many parts to it, like there's an opportunity for kids to wonder and play and review core concepts, have opportunity to practice and have choice in which word problem they might solve. Then they apply their learning by connecting with students and choosing options on how best to showcase their learning, followed up with going in and giving and receiving feedback on their solutions. This is just one example of what a HyperDoc might look like. In this case, the social emotional learning piece comes in many different ways, where the child gets a chance to work with a teammate to solve a problem. I often have students revise some of the word problems with more culturally responsive verbiage, which is so incredible to include them in that process. And then they learn from each other and not just me. So it really fosters that social piece. So that's just one example of what a HyperDoc can look like. So the reason why I feel strongly that these could be a valuable asset to your social emotional instruction is that as you study this 5 core competencies wheel put out by Castle, you'll start to see how your lesson design can fit under one of these core pieces. This isn't going to happen all the time, of course, but in this collection, you get a chance, and these are all actual lessons that I can share with you all. But what you'll see is that if you're looking to teach something like relationship skills, you might offer some restorative justice lessons in your classroom. Or if you want to really focus on social awareness, you may invite children into reading literature that really focuses on that. So lessons truly can help us to accomplish the well-being and the social emotional awareness of students. Now, I believe that HyperDocs can do that for you in one of 2 ways, either through explicit instruction, where you actually teach from a HyperDoc that focuses on one of those core competencies. For example, empathy can easily be found under this category of relationship skills, understanding and empathy towards yourself and others. As an example, that would be an explicit instructional lesson. So let's take a look at these and see what we mean when we say empathy HyperDoc. Here is the whole entire lesson. This was designed by one of our good friends, Nadine Gilkison. I've made minor tweaks here, but the bulk of this lesson is so well designed that you'll see all the components, and what an incredible way to get kids thinking about the title, or the concept, of empathy. So here Nadine has launched students into this concept through this particular book called The Invisible Boy. She has it packaged up in a video here, and the directions are here where students would go in and listen in, and then they get an opportunity to choose one of these additional stories. Again, literature as a great opportunity to teach some of the social emotional components that we're looking to teach. Let the literature do it for you, but let the kids choose. Then they go in and they start thinking about the difference between empathy and sympathy. This is where some of our vocabulary development might come in. But you'll notice that there's different opportunities for kids to apply their understanding of empathy. So actually there's 3 slides here, all titled Apply. So that means that children have multiple opportunities to take the concept and apply it. And the videos really highlight the real world application for kids. Here's another one where they get a chance to read this book and study that toolkit of resources. And then the kids are going to go in and just kind of answer this question of like, how does this relate to the topic of empathy? Then it's their turn to be creators. This is why we love HyperDocs, because it's not consumption related. Kids are actually invited into showing what they know in creative ways. And I love how Nadine in this lesson, she just kind of says like, how will you share your creation with others to create an impact? You know, she's got this quote from John Spencer: students need to solve real problems that connect to a real context. And she's given 4 different options. You could record a video of yourself reading a picture book about empathy, which would really connect to what they've done previously in this lesson. They could create their own children's book. Love that. start a campaign with your school on how to tackle the issue of empathy, or brainstorm possible solutions to the problem and bounce your ideas with a teacher, family member, or peer, which is really getting kids talking about the skills and the social emotional skills that we want to see, but starting a conversation. So I love the range of options. And then lastly, students in this Empathy HyperDoc are invited to do more, read more, watch more, and extend their learning in ways that are very open-ended and choice-related. Of course, there's the caveat that these are more for upper grade, so if you're working with younger students, you may choose to leave these off or put your own extension ideas in. So this is just an incredible lesson that just really shows how sometimes you can just explicitly teach a skill or concept to kids. I've also included this second HyperDoc lesson. This one is designed with Google Docs. And the purpose of this lesson is actually the same, helping students understand the idea of empathy. But here it's done in a different way. They have a multimedia text set, and then there's a task here where kids jot what they noticed and really extracted from that text set. Then you'll notice the same video, learn about empathy, and then there's an application where they actually create a scene or a story, if you will, using Storyboard that, to really kind of say what they now know about empathy that maybe they didn't quite understand before. So this is like a one-page Google Doc HyperDoc lesson, whereas this one is a little bit more complex, both of which teach the concept explicitly. The entire lesson is designed around this concept of empathy. Another way to use HyperDocs to teach social emotional learning is to do it in more subtle or implicit ways. So, for example, you have your content standards, you have, things that you are tasked to teach as a teacher. And sometimes it doesn't feel like we have time or space in our curriculum to address the social emotional learning or to even tap into those 5 core competencies. But actually, we can sneak them in anytime. So I want to share with you a lesson that is called, it's a public service announcement, PSA HyperDoc lesson. So this actual HyperDoc is designed to teach like how to read a PSA and how to create one on your own. So it's really generated for like argument reading, writing, opinion reading, writing, media literacy, like those kinds of things. In fact, the objectives I've tacked on to the end here. This hits argument writing, digital publishing, student voice, social advocacy, has a lot of cross-curricular content, how to learn from a mentor text and things like that. So how is this, teaching this argument piece, going to tap into any of those 5 core competencies? Well, if you look back at the core competencies themselves, you'll see that social awareness piece can be integrated into this idea of studying personal or public service announcements. You might also tap into this as in terms of responsible decision making. So this lesson is so fun, even though it hits on some really hard topics. So students first begin by exploring some example PSAs. So these are like real world things that absolutely we want to train our students to become aware of the society that they live in. Whether it's global warming or thinking about the value of words and cyberbullying, or maybe thinking about, like maybe there's like an environmental impact that we're trying to instill in our students. Whatever the topic is, we want kids to look at the world around them and see that things are wrong and that they can fix them and they can have an impact. So they explore these examples. Then they do some learning. This is kind of like that direct instruction piece around what a PSA is. What do we mean? What are the components? What makes a PSA exactly just that? And so they do some learning there. Then they kind of just like learn, straight up, here's what I want you to know. Then they go back and they rewatch or re-explore those same examples with the new lens of these parts here that we've listed. So this really gets them understanding the content of PSAs and argument writing and whatnot. then is there a chance to create them. And I just come right out and say, like, you become an advocate. You become the voice. You become the one who speaks for the trees, if you will. So there's an open invitation to students to be that type of socially responsible and aware type of a citizen, right? They go off and create. I have an example in here. Then they share with a bigger audience. That's a big part to actually truly tapping into not only responsible decision making, but the social awareness piece. So how can I, as a student, a learner, have an impact on the society that I'm part of, right? So this is where, the focus of this HyperDoc or this lesson itself is really on argument, reading, writing, creating a PSA. But you can see that I've tucked in some of those core competencies like indirectly. And so this is where the value of our lesson planning can truly speak to and enhance the well-being and the social, emotional components in our students. So that being said, and hopefully by looking at those examples, you're beginning to think about how you might remix a HyperDoc lesson or take any curricular lesson planning that you have coming up and include a social emotional element. If you're teaching poetry, might you include some poets or poems that really kind of lean into some of the stories of voices that aren't generally heard, or maybe you include examples of marginalized community members, things like that. So how can you take maybe what you're already doing in a lesson you already have planned and just include a little social emotional element? That's my invitation to you. That's my call to action. And with that, I of course want to remind you that you as the teacher have so much influence on the lives of the students that you work with.
I have a lot of memories from when I was a child. One that's always stuck out to me though was when I was about 10 years old and I was in school and I struggled. And I didn't struggle with English, math, or science. I struggled holding still. And I would try to listen and focus and process ideas, but I couldn't help myself. And to be honest, I would sit there and then I would just start tapping. And the students in the class would look at me and they'd say, "Hey, stop tapping." A lot of the time, I didn't even realize I was doing it. And then eventually even the teachers got after me and they would yell at me and they'd say, "Clint, you have to stop tapping." It got so bad that I got sent to the principal's office for tapping. And he said to me, "Okay, maybe when you go back to class, just try sitting on your hands." So I did. I went back to class, and when I felt myself starting to tap, I did this. I sat on my hands. And that worked for about 5 seconds. One time I was tapping in class, and my teacher, Mr. Jensen, he looked at me, and he yelled. And he said, "Clint, stay after class." And I thought to myself, this is it. I am done. Now, I've always been the type of person that believes that a single moment in time can change a person's life. And this was one of those moments for me, and I will never forget it. So I was sitting there with Mr. Jensen and an empty classroom. He walked past me and he sat next to his desk and he said, "Clint, come here. I want to talk to you." And as he looked me right in the eye, he said, "Now, I need you to know something. You're not in trouble. But I do have just one question that I have to ask you." And he said, "Have you ever thought about playing the drums?" And in that moment, Mr. Jensen, he leaned back and he opened the top drawer of his desk. And he reached in and he pulled out my very first pair of drumsticks. And he held them in his hands and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Clint, you're not a problem. I think you're in trouble." From that moment on, I've never put those sticks down. I've toured, recorded, and played drums all over the world. My whole college education was paid for with drumsticks in my hand. Just because of a single moment in time when somebody believed in me. And he saw something in me that I didn't even see within myself. And from that moment, I learned that there's a difference between being the best in the world and being the best for the world.
So I just love that video. It just reminds me that your impact as an educator is huge. How you see yourself, how you see your students, how you interact and engage is maybe the best kept secret in terms of social emotional teaching and learning. I hope you see HyperDocs as a great way to tap into the well-being of your students. You can always find more at hyperdocs.co, where we have curated lessons. You can search for templates, you can search for example lessons. Click on any tile, it will open up into folders and tons of resources for you. There are lessons and courses and pathways designed to meet your continued need to grow as an educator and as a professional. You'll find as you click through hyperdocs.co that our blog, for example, has tons of posts related to social emotional learning. For example, this one on how media impacts the well-being of students.